The contact appeared on Shenoreth's display at 4:01, and it was not moving the way threat contacts move. The Rethani Compact had governed 3,800 species across 54 star systems for 14,000 years. In that time, it had issued 847,000 administrative directives to member civilizations. Not one had been refused. Magdural, reviewing the morning's transmission queue in the accordance hall above the Kethosi administrative belt, did not expect today to change that number. The Tereth file sat at the bottom of the queue, 290 years of membership, minimum documentation throughout. Magdural noted it the way you note weather. Thessaly Vorkan noticed something else. He was in Gallery 94, third row, where he had sat for 6,200 of his 7,200 years as institutional witness. His stylus was in its holder. On the desk beside it sat a document he had pulled from the archive that morning, a Kethosi Deep Survey report, 290 years old, bound in compressed mineral fiber. The outer margins had faded to near nothing. The center columns were still readable. He had not opened it. He could not have said, if asked, why he had taken it from the shelf. That was the wrong detail. Vorkan did not pull documents without reason. He watched Magdural prepare for the session below. No warning, no declaration, no second transmission. That was how it would end, though Vorkan did not know it yet. Stay with me, he had been surprised 4 times in 7,200 years. This was about to be the 5th. 290 years earlier, the Tereth had filed their registration with the Rethani Compact on a Tuesday. Nobody recorded the date as significant. The processing clerk noted the application, logged the species designation, forwarded the territorial claims for survey, and moved to the next item in the queue. 3 weeks later, the compact sent a standard welcome transmission. The Tereth acknowledged it in plain text, 14 words, no questions asked. The compact had a word for species like that, unremarkable. In the 14,000 years of the compact's operation, 847,000 directives had been issued to member civilizations. The average compliance confirmation arrived within 19 days. The record was 4 days, held by a species called the Vrethkan, who had been so eager to comply that they transmitted confirmation before the directive window had technically opened. Magdural had always found that particular fact satisfying. He had never transmitted a directive twice. Magdural was Kethosi, 2.6 meters tall, forearm bilateral, a pale gray-blue carapace that darkened toward near black along his jaw ridge when his body temperature rose. 6 secondary eyes ran in a lateral band above his 2 primary eyes, all gold irised, all currently fixed on the morning queue. His lower arm stayed still at his sides, a discipline marker, a thing Kethosi commanders learned before they learned anything else. Movement in the lower arms meant something. He did not waste it. At his sternum sat a carved pale mineral disc, his rank indicator. It had been redesigned 4 times. Each redesign took a decade. His current disc was his 4th. No scars. Kethosi command tradition held that a commander who bore wounds had led from the wrong position. In 38 years of service, Magdural had absorbed 14 civilizations into compact administration without a single armed engagement. He had led always from exactly the right position. He read the Tereth file aloud for the benefit of the gallery record. 290 years of membership, 11 outer territories claimed. No fleet presence filed at any of the 5 recognized defense registries. Documentation current, minimal, unremarkable. He paused. Administratively present, strategically negligible. He moved to the next item on the queue. In Gallery 94, Vorkan's stylus remained in its holder. He picked up the survey document, set it down again, did not open it. The accordance hall was the largest deliberative chamber in the Kethosi administrative belt, built inside a hollowed asteroid, 11 kilometers of carved basalt corridor leading to a central floor ringed by 180 tiered observation galleries. The ceiling above the floor was open vacuum behind a pressure membrane. Through it, the surrounding star field was always visible, unchanged by session or crisis or century. Members had watched stars during proceedings for 14,000 years. The stars did not watch back. The air smelled of carved rock and filtered circulation, the mineral cold of a structure built inside something that had once been flying debris and was now the center of known governance. Magdural's tactical coordinator, Shenoreth, sat to his left. She was Kethosi, meticulous, and filed formation status reports in triplicate as a personal habit that predated her appointment by several years. She had never been asked to. She did it anyway. This morning she had already filed one, noting the compact enforcement formation at 5.8 light hours from the Tereth boundary, 31 capital ships, 94 support craft, 7,200 crew, standard pre-compliance posture. She noted no anomalies. She sealed the report. In Gallery 17, a junior Orvathi observer named Prane Tesek was recording the session in a shorthand she had invented herself. She sat in the same seat every session. She had offered once to teach the shorthand to a colleague. The colleague had declined. She had not offered again. Vorkan watched them both with the professional attention of someone who had watched 7,200 years of institutional procedure and had learned, a very long time ago, to notice what other observers had stopped seeing. He picked up the survey document a second time, set it beside his stylus, looked at it the way you look at something you are not yet ready to open. 3 light hours from the accordance hall, at a boundary station called Vareth 9 on the outer edge of Tereth space, Commander Sela Oren was on her second bowl of tea when the transmission arrived. Vareth 9 was small, 43 personnel, 2 functional comm arrays, 1 tactical overlay that covered the full Tereth boundary zone. The station had been in operation for 27 years, which was exactly as long as Oren had been with the Tereth Boundary Authority. She had not been assigned to Vareth 9 for all of those years, but she had been the one who built it, and she had come back to it eventually, the way people return to the thing they made. Gray-streaked hair kept close, posture that did not suggest stillness, it suggested readiness held in reserve. There was a difference, though most people did not notice it. On her desk sat a cracked porcelain bowl, not the one she was drinking from, that one was intact, glazed white regulation issue. The cracked one sat to the left of her display, empty, the chip at the rim smooth from years of being picked up and set back down. It was not there for sentiment, she would say if asked. She just found it useful to have something nearby that was already broken and still worked. Her analyst, Tove Reisman, was 26 years old and had been at Vareth 9 for 22 months. She had learned in those 22 months that Commander Oren communicated in the minimum words required. She had also learned that when Oren's minimum dropped below 4 words, something was happening. Reisman brought her a second tea at 3:20. Oren noted without looking up that the first one was still hot. "Sorry," Reisman said. "Don't be," Oren said. She picked up the second one anyway. In the Compact's accordance hall, Magdural had reached item 4 on the morning queue, the Tereth directive. He had drafted it 3 weeks ago, 44 words. It had taken him less than an hour, including the legal review. He had not found the legal review difficult. Vorkan had watched 412 compliance directives issued from that floor in his years as institutional witness. He had recorded compliance in each case. He opened his notes for today's session. His stylus hovered. He did not write anything. He checked the date on the survey document's cover instead. 290 years ago. He closed it again. The directive transmitted at 3:40 standard. Imperial Priority 1 encryption, routed to the Tereth Boundary Authority's primary channel. The text was 44 words. It was, as Magdural had described it in his notes, an administrative matter. The Terath were to surrender administrative control of their 11 outer territories within 28 standard days, transfer all energy infrastructure and orbital platforms to compact management, and reduce their defense enrollment to no more than 1,800 registered personnel. Compliance was expected. Magdural noted the transmission confirmation. It blinked green. He picked up a water vessel, drank, set it down. He turned to Shenorath. "Standard compliance timeline," he said. "Expect processing." He had said those words 14 times before. Each time had been the last time he needed to say them. Commander Sela Oren received the transmission at Verath 9 at 3:44. She read it once. She read it again. She set down the cracked bowl, not the tea, the cracked one, which she had been turning in her hands without realizing it. "Get me Captain Wren," she said. Reisman was across the room. She watched Oren's face. Oren's expression had not changed. Reisman had been at Verath 9 for 22 months and had not yet seen Commander Oren's expression change in response to anything. She had begun to wonder in an abstract way what it would take. She filed that observation away and reached for the comm. At 3:52, a sealed relay phrase transmitted from Verath 9 to a set of coordinates that appeared on no compact registry. The Duskline was an unofficial name. No compact chart used it. No survey document labeled it. It referred to a region of interstellar space between Terath territory and the edge of the Kethosi patrol corridors, characterized by high particulate density and navigational unreliability. Ships got strange readings in the Duskline. Signals scattered. The compact's navigation systems rated it as low-value traversal space and routed around it when possible. 4.1 light-hours into the Duskline from the nearest compact navigation beacon, at coordinates that had never been logged in any database anyone could access. A ship called the Hollow Margin had been waiting for 22 months. Vorkan had watched. Vorkan had recorded. Vorkan had never once in 7,200 years set his stylus flat on the table. He did not know yet that he was about to. The Hollow Margin was 1,340 meters long. Its hull had been tested across 19 absorption profiles before the engineers settled on the one that worked. Not invisible, no hull was truly invisible, but against cold interstellar particulate, against the background scatter of the Duskline's density, it registered as gas, background noise, the kind of reading a sensor operator marks as environmental and moves past. In 22 months at position, the Hollow Margin had exchanged 9 transmissions with Verath 9. 9. In 22 months, a long-range buoy produces more traffic. Magdural's sensor arrays, in 38 years of service, had never recorded its signature. Captain Dara Wren received the activation phrase at 3:52. She was already awake. She usually was at this hour, though she would not have said why. She read the phrase. She acknowledged it. One word. She stood still for a moment before she spoke to her crew. Not long, maybe 3 seconds, then she moved. Lev Kahar was running pre-activation diagnostics on the primary weapons array when the relay came through. He was a weapons tech, 34 years old, 4 years at his current post. He stopped when the activation signal hit his console. He reached into his jacket and took out a photograph. His son, 8 years old in the picture, afternoon light coming through a kitchen window in Izmir, an ordinary Wednesday that had been unremarkable until it was something he needed to carry with him. He looked at it for 4 seconds. Then he put it back. His hands were steady when he returned to the console. No fleet signature, no weapons register, no entry in any defense log the compact had ever seen. Just a ship moving in the dark. Back at Verath 9, Tove Reisman was tracking the compact enforcement formation. 31 capital ships, 94 support craft, 7,200 crew. They were positioned at 5.8 light hours from the Terath boundary, which was exactly where enforcement formations always positioned themselves when a compliance window opened. Procedural. Expected. She marked the formation in red on the tactical overlay and made a note of the timestamp. Then she looked at the far edge of the display. There was a white point there, 4.1 light hours from the boundary, deep in the high particulate zone, barely registering, the kind of reading you could mistake for scatter if you weren't paying attention. She had been paying attention for 22 months. Commander Oren had not explained the white point to her. Not once in 22 months had she offered a word about it. And Reisman had decided, somewhere around month 4, not to ask. It had seemed at the time like the kind of decision you make once and don't revisit. She did not revisit it now. She looked at the white point for a long moment. Then she looked back at the red formation, 31 capital ships, 7,200 crew. She did not say anything. Across the room, Oren stood at the tactical display for 11 seconds after the relay confirmation came through. Reisman counted without meaning to. Then Oren sat down. She picked up the cracked bowl from her desk and turned it once in her hands. Then she picked up her tea, the intact one, still warm, and finished it. There was a word for what the Tereth had been doing for 290 years. The Compact had used that word in every file, every assessment, every data review for 3 centuries. It was a word that had a specific meaning inside the Compact's operational framework, a meaning that had been reinforced 847,000 times without a single exception. Unremarkable. Oren set down the tea. She looked at the tactical overlay, the red formation, the white point. She did not explain anything to Reisman. She had not explained anything to Reisman in 22 months, and she was not going to start now. The 290 years of minimum documentation had not been carelessness. The 11 outer territories claimed without announcement had not been small ambition. The fleet presence that had never appeared at any of the 5 recognized defense hubs had not been a fleet that did not exist. It had been a fleet that existed somewhere the Compact's registries did not look. Magdurl, reviewing his compliance timeline in the Accordance Hall, expected a confirmation within 19 days. He had said standard compliance timeline and expect processing, and had turned back to his queue. He had done this 14 times. Each time had been correct. He was watching the stars through the pressure membrane when Shenoreth tapped him on the arm. She did not do that. In the years she had served as his tactical coordinator, she had never touched him to get his attention. She used the comm. She sent a note to his display. She waited. She tapped him on the arm. He looked at her display. The sensor contact had appeared at 4:01. It was moving, and it was not moving the way threat contacts moved. Shenoreth had been trained to read movement signatures the way a navigator reads current. Fast was easy. Aggressive was easy. The patterns that matched threat contact had their own grammar, acceleration profiles, vector shifts, the particular way a ship moves when it is trying to reach something before the thing can react. This was not that. The contact at the edge of her display was moving with a quality she did not have a word for. Not slow, not hesitant. Deliberate was close, but not quite right either. It was the kind of motion that assumed everything had already been decided, and the moving was simply the last step in a sequence that started a long time ago. She pulled the contact's signature history, tried to match it to a registry, found nothing. She began to file a formation status report, triplicate as always. She stopped at the 3rd line. She had never stopped at the 3rd line before. In Gallery 94, Vorkan's stylus was still in its holder. He was looking at the survey document. The document was 290 years old. The cover was compressed mineral fiber, slightly warped at one corner from the archive's humidity variance over 3 centuries. The center columns, he could see this much without opening it, from the way the binding sat, were still dark with readable ink. The outer margins, he knew from the brief look he had taken that morning, had faded to the color of the cover itself. He had looked at that faded margin for a long moment before putting the document down. He picked it up now and checked the date on the cover page again. 290 years ago, a Kethosi survey team had visited the Terath home system and produced this document. They had noted the energy infrastructure, the territorial claims, the particular silence of the Terath's external communications. Their conclusion: he had not read the body of the document, but he knew the compact summary of it, the one that had been copied into 290 years of subsequent assessments, was unremarkable. He closed the document. Below him, on the floor of the accordance hall, Shenoreth had not yet moved her lower arms. The formation status report was still unfinished on her display. The sensor contact was still moving. Vorkan set the survey document beside his stylus. At 4:01, a ship no compact registry had ever listed was moving through the dusk line toward the enforcement formation at 5.8 light hours. Not fast. The way a decision moves after the deciding is already done. Vorkan watched the pressure membrane above the floor. The stars beyond it were the same as they had always been. He did not write anything. He waited. Vorkan opened the document. Not to read it, not yet. He opened it to the cover page and checked the date one more time, the way you check a thing you already know, because knowing it twice feels different from knowing it once. The survey team had visited the Terath home system 290 years ago. They had written their findings in careful columns. They had used the word unremarkable in their conclusion. The document had sat in the accordance hall's archive for 3 centuries, retrieved twice in that time, once by a records clerk performing a routine catalog audit, and once this morning by Thessaly Vorkan, for reasons he still could not name. He closed it again. Below him, on the floor of the accordance hall, the morning session continued. Magdural had moved on to the 5th item in his queue. Shenoreth's formation status report sat unfinished on her display. She had not mentioned this to Magdural. The sensor contact was still moving. In Gallery 17, Praintesek's shorthand pencil had stopped. She was looking at Shenoreth's display from across the floor, trying to read the numbers from this distance. She could not. Vorkan watched the pressure membrane. He picked up his stylus, held it over his notes. He did not write anything. The enforcement formation was 31 capital ships and 94 support craft, positioned at 5.8 light hours from the Terath boundary. This was where enforcement formations always went. The position had a name in compact operational planning, the compliance threshold, though no one used the full name in daily speech. They called it the threshold. Standard. Expected. A 14,000-year-old institution did not need to explain its postures. It only needed to hold them. 7,200 crew. Most of them were doing what you do on a ship that is holding position. Routine maintenance, formation checks, the slow work of keeping 125 vessels aligned and ready without actually moving. The threshold posture had a scheduled duration of 35 days, 5 days past the compliance window. In 38 years, Magdural had never needed those extra 5 days. Ren had waited, Kahar had waited, the ship had waited. 22 months in the dusk line against cold particulate running dark. 9 transmissions total. The crew had not been told what they were waiting for, only where to wait, and what phrase would mean the waiting was over. Kahar had his photograph. Others had their own versions of the same thing. A letter reread until the folds were soft. A voice recording played at low volume during off-watch. A habit from before that had no function here and was kept anyway. You carry what you can carry. Captain Wren had told them once near the end of the 4th month that patience was not a passive thing. It costs something, she said. Every day it costs the same amount. Don't let anyone tell you it's free. She had not said it again. She had not needed to. At 3:59, Magdural finished the 6th item in his queue. He looked up at the pressure membrane. The star field was the same as always. He noted this the way he noted most things, as confirmation that the expected state of affairs was holding. Shenorath, at his left, pulled up the sensor contact again. It was still moving. She had run the signature 3 times now against the compact's recognition database. 3 times it had returned no match. She had expanded the search to include vessels registered in the last 200 years, which was further back than any active registry search she had ever needed to run. Still nothing. She began a new query. Unregistered contacts in the Duskline region, last 24 months. The system returned one result. The timestamp on the result was from 22 months ago. The contact had been logged as environmental particulate scatter, high probability. The duty officer who had reviewed it had marked it low confidence and moved on. Shenorath looked at the current contact, then at the archived entry, then at the current contact again. She reached for the comm to alert Magdural. The transmission arrived at 4:04. Plain text, no encryption. 6 words. Magdural read them. His primary eyes, both of them, went through the text once at full reading speed. His secondary eyes, the lateral band, tracked the transmission metadata. Sender authenticated as Terath Boundary Authority, sent from Verath 9, timestamp 4:01 plus transit delay. He did not read it a second time. He sat for 4 seconds. His lower arm stayed still. His jaw plates, the cathosi musculature that gave his voice its layered harmonic quality, did not move. 6 words. The compact had absorbed 14 civilizations without raising a single weapon. Magdural had believed, without examining the belief, that this was because he was reasonable. He had never considered the other explanation, that it was because the 14 civilizations had looked at the compact and reached a particular conclusion about the math. The Terath had looked at the same math. They had reached a different conclusion. He had not finished processing this when Shenorath's display began to change. At 4:13, the hollow margin's primary weapons array confirmed a firing solution. Lev Kahar confirmed it. He did not speak when he did. He entered the confirmation code and exhaled through his nose, and that was all. The photograph was in his pocket. The kitchen window in Izmir was 3 years and 4.1 light hours away. His hands were steady. No plan, no armada, no second chance to misread the silence. At 4:14, Shenorath stopped at the 3rd line of her formation status report. She had filed reports in triplicate for 11 years. She had never stopped at the 3rd line. She stopped now because the 3rd line required her to state the current status of the enforcement formation, and she did not know what to write. Magdural looked at her display. At 4:16, he reached for the transmission console. He had drafted the second directive before the first one's window had technically opened at 44 words, same language, same authority. In 38 years and 14 absorptions, he had never needed it. He activated the channel. He did not finish the transmission. He got as far as the second sentence. Then he stopped. His lower arms, which had not moved all morning, moved. Just once, a small shift, less than a degree, the kind of movement you make when the ground changes under you and your body knows before your mind does. He closed the channel. At 4:20, the accordance hall went quiet. Not gradually. Galleries that had been running low conversations, the ambient noise of 180 occupied observation posts, the shuffle and note-taking of a routine session. It stopped at once, the way sound stops in a sealed room when the pressure changes. Praintesic's pencil was on her desk. She did not pick it up. Vorkant was watching the pressure membrane. At 4:23, the star field beyond the membrane was the same as it had always been. One formation marker on Shenorath's overlay was no longer returning signal. She stared at the display. She had been trained to read formation data since she was 22 years old. The shape of the data was familiar. The meaning of the shape was not something her training had covered. The sealed formation status report from that morning, triplicate, noting no anomalies, filed before anything happened, was still on her display. She looked at it. The words "no anomalies" sat inside a document that now described a world that no longer existed. She did not know what category came next. Magdural read the 6 words a second time. He did not look at Vorkan. Vorkan set his stylus down flat on the table. Not in its holder. The 5th time in 7,200 years. The first time had been during a border arbitration that ended a civilization's claim to its own home system. The second had been when a species called the Vrethkon submitted compliance with a directive that had, by administrative error, ordered them to decommission their own sun. The third had been personal. A species Vorkan had observed for 400 years, whose final transmission he had recorded, and whose file he had closed without annotation because nothing he wrote seemed adequate. The fourth had been a small thing, actually, a young Kethosi attaché who had, in the middle of a formal session, laughed at something her superior said and then covered her mouth. Vorkan had been surprised not by the laugh but by how long it had been since he had seen one. The 5th time was now. He looked at the survey document on his desk. Below him, Magdural walked off the floor of the accordance hall. He moved with the bearing of a commander who had spent 38 years being exactly right, which meant he walked with a precision that had no mechanism for acknowledging its own error. He did not look at Vorkan as he passed Gallery 94. He did not look up at all. The galleries began to empty. It took about an hour. No formal adjournment was called. No vote, no directive. Members of the 180 observation posts filed out the way water leaves a cracked vessel, not all at once, not with intention, just the slow drain of a contained thing finding a way out. Shenoreth left with the transmission console still open. Praintesek left her shorthand notes on the desk, the last line unfinished, the pencil beside them. At 5:20, the accordance hall held 3 people. Vorkan, an archive assistant who was not sure whether to leave or stay, and the stars beyond the membrane. The archive assistant left. 3 light hours from the accordance hall, Tove Reisman changed the color of the enforcement formation marker from red to gray. It was a small action, a click, a color shift on a tactical display, but it was the first thing that had been done at Vareth 9 in 40 minutes, and the click was audible in the silence of the station. Oren was at her desk. She saw the change on the overlay. She said nothing. Reisman sat back in her chair. She looked at the gray formation. She looked at the white point, which was no longer where it had been. She looked at Oren. Oren picked up the cracked porcelain bowl, turned it once in her hands and set it down. Then she picked up her tea, the 3rd one of the morning, gone nearly cold, and finished it. "Ma'am," Reisman said. "I know," Oren said. That was all. Vorkan sat alone in the accordance hall for 3 hours. The stars through the membrane did not change. They had not changed in any session he had attended, in any crisis he had witnessed, in any of the 412 compliance confirmations he had recorded. They would not change tomorrow. The compact's administrative queue would open in the morning. Item 1 would be routine. Item 2 would be routine. The Tereth file had been Item 3. He thought about Magdural, who had taken 14 civilizations without a fight, and who had issued the directive "the way you speak to something you believe has no answer to give back." He thought about the cracked bowl on a commander's desk, and what it meant to keep something that was already broken because it still worked. He thought about a photograph in a jacket pocket, and a child in afternoon light, and 4 seconds of looking before the hands went back to the console. He thought about 290 years of filed paperwork, minimum documentation, no fleet presence at any recognized hub. The compact had called it unremarkable. Vorkan had called it nothing. He had recorded it the way he recorded everything, without judgment, and moved on. He should not have moved on. No report filed, no warning issued, no record of what Vorkan understood in that empty room. He picked up the survey document. This time he opened it. The outer margins were nearly gone. The ink had faded to the same pale color as the mineral fiber cover. The words dissolved into the surface they had been written on. But the center columns were still dark, still readable. He turned to the first column and began. The survey team had done their work well. They had noted the Terath home system's energy output, the orbital infrastructure, the territorial claims. They had noted the Terath's communication patterns, minimal external traffic, internal channels encrypted beyond the compact's standard access decryption. The team had flagged this as a possible administrative inefficiency and recommended a documentation follow-up. The follow-up had never been sent. Further in, the survey team had noted something else. The Terath had, at the time of the survey, 14 active shipbuilding facilities. None of them appeared in any external registry. The team had noted this as a possible clerical gap and recommended a disclosure request. The disclosure request had never been sent. Further still, near the back of the document, a junior surveyor had added a note in smaller script, the kind of note you add when you are not sure it belongs in the main body, but you feel wrong leaving it out. The note said, "The Terath representatives were cooperative throughout the survey process. They answered every question we asked. We did not ask about the facilities." Vorkan read it twice. He sat with the document open in his hands and looked at the junior surveyor's line. Then he looked at the 290 years that had passed since it was written. Then he looked at the star field beyond the membrane. In the 90 days that followed the incident, the compact would issue no new directives to Terath space. The enforcement formation at 5.8 light hours from the boundary would hold position for those 90 days without new orders, and then, quietly, without announcement, it would redeploy to standard patrol routes. The Terath file would be reclassified in the compact's administrative database under a category that had not existed before, a category with no other entries. No previous entry, no model to follow, no framework the compact had built in 14,000 years that covered what had happened. They would build the framework later, but they would never again look at a quiet species and use the word unremarkable without checking first whether quiet was the same thing as empty. Vorkan understood this without needing to write it. He read the document from the first column to the last. He did not annotate. He did not open a new file. He read it the way you read something that was already finished before you opened it, the way you read something that was written for an audience that did not exist yet, and then waited 3 centuries for that audience to arrive. Then he understood what the Terath had understood 290 years ago, that some things that look like waiting are only waiting from the outside. He set the document on the desk. The stars beyond the pressure membrane were the same as they had always been. The stylus lay flat on the table beside the open document, its tip still uncapped. Not in its holder,